Well, hello, and welcome to another Flycast Partners webinar. My name is Rich Longo, and I'll be your host today. And I want to thank all of you from throughout the country that are joining us. We have quite a few folks that are still trying to get logged in and dialed in, so we'll do our introductions to give them some time to get in there. But I want to do a special welcome to those folks from New Jersey today, as well as Florida and California and Texas. So thank you for joining us. Today's webinar is on identity management, presented by Lewis Dunn of Ivanti. It's a subject that has a tendency to be a thorn in a lot of organization sides. And Lewis has been a sales engineer at Ivanti since Res was acquired in July 2017. Prior to joining Res in April 2017, Lewis was a senior engineer at Mattress Firm for 5 years. There he implemented and managed Ivanti's identity director and Ivanti automation, along with managing all other infrastructure systems. Today, Lewis is focused on supporting enterprise accounts throughout the pre-sales process across North America. We welcome Lewis, and we thank him for doing this presentation for us today. So before we get started, Lewis, let me do a little introduction on Flycast Partners. Flycast Partners is here to deliver a seriously amazing IT experience. We are founded and staffed by personnel that have many years of experience in the IT space. We took the best ideas from these collective experiences and added the best components necessary to grow and become a leading value-added reseller in the North American IT market. We offer best-in-class implementation services and training in IT service management, IT asset management, IT operations management, enterprise service management, and workload automation spaces, all using ITIL best practice. Our professional services team can easily scale up or down to meet the IT needs of any customer, regardless of your size, complexity, or budgetary restrictions. We offer implementation services both on-site and remote, as well as training to help reinforce your company's long-term IT success. Our ongoing remote administration and support service offerings will enable your organization to focus on those normal day-to-day operations, saving you both precious time and money. Feel free to reach out to us at 844-FLYCAST, that's 844-359-2278, or visit our website at www.flycastpartners.com. This is but one of many weekly webinars that we offer here at Flycast Partners, so I encourage you to take a look at our webinar list, share it with your coworkers, and anyone else you think might have an interest in that topic. We have webinars planned out through September, everything from the 5 pillars of Ivanti to ITIL to other topics within the IT industry. So by all means, and also take the time to chat with one of our IT specialists that are monitoring our chat box there Monday through Friday during normal business hours. And so while I've been doing all these introductions, Lewis, it looks like we've got a bunch more people that have joined us, and we still have more folks that are funneling in, but I'm going to go ahead and turn this presentation over to you and let you do your thing. So I'm sharing, giving you the screen access right now, and so you should have that immediately. And let's unmute you and make sure we've got good volume. There we go. I can hear you.
Hello, buddy. Should be able to see my screen here in a moment.
Very good. And we can. Excellent.
You want me to wait a moment while others join, or you like to start right now?
No, just go ahead and start. And these guys, we always have people that join a little late, but we've got quite a few folks that have already joined us. We'll go ahead and get started.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you for the introduction. Hello, everybody. My name is Louis Dunn. I work for Ivanti as a senior sales engineer. Look forward to kind of the conversation today. And I want this to be a conversation. So as I go through kind of a few PowerPoint slides, we'll go through a little bit of a demonstration. As questions pop up in your head, if ideas or whatever pops up, please feel free to jump in and ask your questions, and I'll do my best to address them. So today we're going to go through one of the pillars within our unified IT stack. We're going to go through Ivanti Identity Director. We're going to talk a little bit about identity governance and administration, which falls under kind of the big umbrella of identity access management. We'll get into some demonstration, which will cover kind of a basic onboarding. We'll review kind of the entitlement templates we have, which really is just kind of our workflow engine that ties really well with our automation engine. It's kind of the workflow automation engine. You'll see that kind of accommodates a lot of the stuff we talk about from an identity perspective, but in other use cases we can help as well. and we'll go through a role change, really just there to highlight kind of what automated transactions look like in terms of deprovisioning access from a previous role, and then automatically provisioning access for a new role for a full-time employee or contractor. Which did a good job providing information. This is just introduction for myself. I worked at Matchroom for 5 years, so I've kind of lived the life as a DevOps engineer. So for me, this was a lot about integration and automation. So we had a security initiative. A big thing for us was to get a hold of the identity and the access that individuals had. So we started off with kind of a plan to implement Identity Director and automation, and this gave us a platform to, over the course of a couple years, automate almost 2.5 million transactions. So a really powerful product, and look forward to kind of going through some discussion and demonstration with everybody here today. So what is Identity and Access Management? So you hear me kind of say Identity Access Management, you'll hear Identity Governance and Administration. So Identity Access Management is kind of the big umbrella. So Gartner has a really cool quote that I think highlights why this is so important of a topic. Identity Access Management ensures the right people get the right access to the right resources at the right time for the right reasons, enabling the right business outcomes. So a lot of this is taking kind of the context of an individual, whether that's an employee or contingent worker, contractor, whoever they may be, whichever role they may have, and automating how we subscribe or unsubscribe access to entitlements based on who they are. So Ivanti Identity Director, where we fall into this kind of umbrella of the identity world, is underneath Identity Access Management, specifically in the Identity Governance and Administration arena. So really what this is about is understanding who has access and who should have access. Through kind of your existing business processes, meaning your business rules around, if I'm in this role, I should have access to this, and if I'm in this location, all these types of organizational and people-like attributes, we aggregate this data, and this really allows us to kind of streamline the overall identity lifecycle management of an individual, keeps you secure and compliant through that automation, and finally, as you go through kind of your internal and external audits, whatever interval you guys go through. If you're a publicly traded company, you're more than likely to do this every quarter, and that's when we start to introduce the idea of access reviews, or also known as attestation, to present kind of your department heads with a report that they can take action on to say, Luis has the correct access, I bless this, we open a ticket, we close a ticket, and auditors can see that we went through our access review. But on the other side of the coin, when I should not have access and we catch something that maybe was done outside of scope, an admin goes in and accidentally does something he or she should not have done, and that's when we have those access reviews as kind of those checks and balances to say, oh, Luis has access he shouldn't have, my respective manager, director, whoever is the department head for that application or business unit can go in and say, let's remove him from that access, and that streamlines and completes that transaction. We'll stop here for a moment. It's a lot of information around just identity management. Any questions so far? Hopefully this is making a little bit of sense.
Folks, please make sure that you're typing your questions in the Q&A section of this WebEx or in the chat, and I'll be happy to read them off to Luis when he has a moment to address them. But he is here to answer your questions, so please don't be shy and put those questions in the Q&A section, and we'll go from there. As of right now, Luis, we do not have any questions.
Okay, awesome. So why do we need IGA, or Identity Governance and Administration? Well, you guys are all either administrators in this type of arena, or you're consumers. In other words, you guys change roles as you start with your existing organization, or you leave this existing organization, you go start with another. You need access to something, right? And so from an administrative perspective, from an end user perspective, it's really important that we can enable folks from a birthright entitlement perspective. So in other words, to provide access, the right access for the right reasons as a new user comes on board or they change roles. However, from an admin perspective, as in companies increase employee counts, we find a lot of folks, unfortunately, from an IT perspective, our budgets remain the same or maybe getting a little bit tighter. Our resources to be able to scale up and support the dynamic changes we see becomes a difficult task. And so as we talk through Identity Director and automation, one of the big things for me that I realized as a customer was the ability to automate repetitive tasks to then allow me and my team to focus on more proactive, more impactful, strategic business initiatives for the organization. We all love what we do. It can be difficult to just sit at your desk and provision an account all day long or to deprovision access. So automating, streamlining those transactions really allows you to go forward and start to look at the business process itself and do a couple of things. Streamline it for yourself as an admin, and more importantly, enable the end users, your business to be successful and thus removing kind of the potential IT bottleneck that sometimes comes up. And most importantly, from a security initiative, as we start to talk about the automated provisioning and deprovisioning, what we talk about is standardization of a business process, standardization of the actual execution of a provision or deprovisioning of an account, which translates into ensuring you guys are secure and compliant. And the last piece here, through all of that kind of automation of kind of provision and deprovision access based on who an individual is and their context, we now start to shift and put the identity of an individual, the virtual identity, if you will, at the middle of the organization to, in other words, say, we will provision all access or manage all access into on-prem and off-prem systems. So we really start to take a stance from what used to be Active Directory as a source of truth for IT shops and transitioning into a more mature posture to saying we'll leverage what we have from an HR system to streamline what access individuals have across their employment. So it's a quick slide right here that just talks about the 5 different pillars we have at Ivanti that Flycast partners with us in terms of how we enable and support our different customers out here. But on the right, you'll see identity management, and that's kind of what we'll focus on today. But just wanted to at least present this up for those that maybe aren't as familiar with all the different pillars we have at a high level. We touch on security, whether that's third-party patch or OS patching, to unified endpoint management that includes the user workspace management, the profile management, cross-physical, VDI, et cetera. And our IT XM, which really is our IT asset, both software and hardware, and importantly, the service management side of things. So this is a very high-level architecture diagram. Really, I would like to call it more of a marketecture, if you will. From left to right, you'll see we have something, the authoritative sources. So we like to say we'll leverage a source of truth or sources of truth, an aggregation of those sources to build an identity repository or identity warehouse. That identity warehouse, as we start to build out entitlements, what that does is leverages those personnel attributes like what your first name is, your last name, all the way into what job title you have, which organization, which company you belong to. We start to marry those pieces of data together, as well as unique identifiers, like could be an AD SAM account name, could be a employee ID, and the marriage of those things with an email address, maybe a personal, maybe a business email address. You start to build out attributes for an individual, which can then be leveraged to granularly control access control. So we go from more of a role-based access control to an actual attribute-based access control, which really just provides you kind of, as from an administrative perspective, a real agile platform to work with to ensure folks have the right access for the right reasons. And again, on the right, we see that we both will help on the on-prem and SaaS side of things. The biggest thing there is when we talk about integrating with different systems, we have out-of-the-box connectors, around 400 out-of-the-box connectors that can be leveraged. Really what that is a starting template to connect into your on-prem and off-prem systems, and as well as a platform that enables you to connect into systems we may not have an out-of-the-box connector for today. And not to get too technical there, but really we're just limited to a CLI, a command line interface that we can leverage to talk to System X or Application X. Cool. So we get right into the demonstration.
Let's go for it. We've even had a couple more folks that have joined us. Oh, wait a minute. We have a question. Jason wants to know, is there a list of connectors available for identity? Identity Director, I'm sorry. Yep.
Sure. It's a good question. So Jason, just to be clear, so Identity Director, as we go through the demonstration, this will be the workflow side, and automation will be kind of the execution, the engine that automates that said transaction from the workflow. So just to be clear, you'll probably see when we start to talk about connectors, it really is more from an automation perspective. And to answer your question, we have a PDF that we can share. I can get that with the Flycast team. We can share that out to the group that's attending this. And also we have a webpage that's the Ivanti Marketplace, and I can share that later towards the end of the demonstration. And that's a place where Ivanti employees, meaning our sales engineers, our actual developers, our product teams, our partners like Flycast and other partners, our customers, really is a community where folks can upload their connectors that they've built for their use cases. Our product team reviews and blesses those, and then we publish those to this marketplace. And that's a place where you can then import those building blocks into your environment and then just configure kind of your specific environment variables.
All right, thank you, Luis. And folks, keep those questions coming. Remember, type those in the Q&A section of this WebEx, and I'll go ahead and ask Luis for them as he takes many pauses throughout this presentation.
Thanks, guys. Good question. So start the demonstration now, and what you're looking at now is Orange HRM. This is just an open source HR platform that a lot of vendors use to kind of illustrate one of those sources of truth to leverage into the identity warehouse. So this is not an Ivanti product, just an open source HR system we use, but we'll use this as kind of our HR tool to synchronize into Ivanti Identity Director. You know, that I hope that none of the folks on this webinar are actually going through and onboarding individuals or offboarding individuals in their respective HR systems. But this is just kind of I want to go through this effort so I can show how today most admins that go through kind of the lifecycle management, you're notified via an email, you're notified via walking by your desk naming because someone doesn't have access and needs it now, open ticket that is assigned to you to provision access for employee X, et cetera. So what this is doing is streamlining that whole process. So what used to be a process where yesterday as an admin, you needed to go into multiple systems and provision access. As a customer myself at Mattress Firm, we found that we became the bottleneck for the organization because it took us too long to provision accounts. We were always reacting and we were never proactive. So on top of your normal requests and incidents that you need to respond to as an IT organization, you have your security and compliance things around ensuring folks, again, have the right access for the right reasons. So a lot of organizations we work with, your onboarding process could be streamlined and take a day, or Unfortunately, it may take a week or two long to provision access for a new employee, or to deprovision access and provision access for a new role. So what we're doing here is we're going to be showing, I'm going to onboard an individual, and we're going to see how our identity director and automation platform can listen for that data, for those changes, and then quickly automate that individual's access. So I'm going to grab someone from our attendee list. I will onboard Andrew Parvis. We're going to give Andrew some access here. And what we're doing here is just, we're going to call it a few things like which job title, which organization he works in. So we're going to give Andrew an application admin access within IT, and we're going to put him in Dublin. Assign him to a manager. And we'll save this. So for now, we're done kind of in our HR system. I'll jump back over to now what is Ivanti Identity Director. It's just the main dashboard as you first sign in. We're going to get into the transaction screen, so in a few moments we can see Andrew's account being provisioned live. We have this is my demo environment, so I have a listener that listens every minute for new hires and new role changes, etc. So let me see where that is at. We're now jumping in the Ivanti Automation Console. So real quickly at a high level, I can see something's been scheduled. So we're going to start to see some action here. As we look at Andrew, we can now start to see his Active Directory account being provisioned. We'll wait for this to complete. And what this will do is we have, later on, we'll get into the entitlement templates, really, which is just the workflow side of things. And you'll see that we have a very powerful policy engine. And what this is doing is we have a prerequisite. We have a prerequisite that an individual needs to have been successfully provisioned an Active Directory account before we start to provision other access for that individual. So a real easy example is, we'll provision the AD account before we provision an email account, or things in Salesforce, or things in Concur, et cetera, et cetera. Now, as this is a demo environment, it's a little bit scaled down, but to give you kind of an example of what it looks like in a real-world production environment, I talked to you a little bit earlier. In my old environment at Mattress Firm, we were the biggest retailer. They are the biggest retailer in the bedding industry. Retail environments, you have around 40% turnover. We're around 43% turnover. As you can imagine, it becomes difficult for IT to keep up with all those transactions and to ensure we were secure and compliant. So in our environment, as a new individual is onboarded, they would receive almost 60 to 70 transactions based on who they were. And those were transactions that were otherwise done manually. And you can start to see how painful of a process that starts to become for both the admin and, more importantly, for the end user. We lose productivity, and we become that bottleneck. Just been talking to you guys, and you can start to see a lot of transactions kick off, and I'm not doing anything. We just have access automatically being provisioned. And this is really where the business value is realized. We have individuals that now have the access they should have for the right reasons, and more importantly, they have it day one. And that's when we start to talk about birthright entitlement. So we put Andrew as a application admin in IT, reporting to me. So we'll take a quick look at Andrew's account in the system, and you'll see how Andrew's been provisioned with data based on a couple fields that you saw me fill out earlier in our HR system. So we have properties for Andrew, and what this is really our unique identifiers. Again, we talked about employee ID, and that's leveraging kind of your HR system, your existing HR system. Your AD, your email accounts become very popular, and those are common to be a unique identifier for an individual. You'll have other systems where it makes sense that you may need to capture a particular username and leverage that as a unique identifier. And as we go across these tabs, we'll start to see attributes. And this is where the platform stands out for me is, well, of course, we have our out-of-the-box attributes that can be leveraged. But as you build out per your business process, you can configure your own attributes and name them as you'd like to. So things like your laptop or your endpoint, the ability to associate that machine name to an individual on top of these other things we're talking about becomes very powerful, because now we start to talk about not just streamlining the access management behind the scenes, but also potentially integrating with things like Ivanti Endpoint Manager or a platform that's commonly used, SCCM, right? So we can start to talk about integrations with other systems to now streamline what stance you have in terms of endpoint management. And that's really where kind of this unified IT conversation really becomes valuable and comes into play. And just to call this out, a lot of people, it's important we keep security. So there are things, we have our own role-based access control in terms of how administrators can read or write data in this console. So as something like a birthday, something maybe like a personal email address, things that may be more sensitive, a phone number, we may not want to be able to present that to everybody that's an admin in the console. Things like that are sensitive data. We need to ensure we're compliant and we're not exposing information like that. So that's where we can start to mask and hide it. And so as you see my mouse next to birthday, the value is not exposed. However, but things like your first name, your last name, things that aren't a big deal, we can show that here. We talked about this identity warehouse. We talked about, tying the person and the organizational data together. And this is where we start to see the organizational attributes. And again, because this is a scaled down environment, we're not going to see maybe all the different attributes you'd have in your specific organization. You'll see things like cost centers that can be leveraged for different reasons. And really for me, the more attributes you have for the person, for your organization, it just gives you that much more granular control over what your policies should be as far as how we subscribe or unsubscribe employees to different entitlements. And finally, we look at the diagnostics. This is just a good little overview from one perspective to see what access Andrew has. These are services he's qualified for. So earlier we talked about how we just were talking, our AD account was provisioned, and then we start to see things like his location, his group membership is updated, so things like your security groups, your distribution groups, your email address, your properties to those different systems we update. Those are all streamlined and automated here. Any questions so far?
I don't see any fresh questions at the moment, Luis. So, folks, if you have questions, please go ahead and type those in, and he'll be more than happy to answer them for you. So I guess we can press on.
Okay. So for me, as you start to look at the screen and see these different transactions be automated, I encourage you to kind of think through, again, whether or not you're the folks that are actually administrating these types of transactions. At the end of the day, you're involved in the process to some extent. So start to think through your specific organization's repetitive tasks that are manual. And this is a great platform that could be utilized to streamline those processes. So I'm going to take a moment. We're going to take a dive into the AD Windows user account, which is really just provision an AD account. This entitlement to the service. We'll take a few walkthroughs through the attributes, the qualification, and workflow tabs. This is just really just a general properties of this particular entitlement. I just wanted to call out that we have a self-service portal. So oftentimes when we talk through this automation in terms of the identity and their provisioning, different organizations, anywhere from 70–80% or so of transactions, I believe, should be able to be automated based on an attribute change. However, we still have that delta 20–30% or so, which sometimes would require self-service. Things like I'm going to be working on this team for a temporary time, and I need temporary access with an approval. And when that window expires, we need to be able to remember to, of course, deprovision that access as it's a temporary project. What becomes difficult in IT for admin is it's very easy to access. It becomes very difficult to follow up and ensure that we're moving access, and that's when we start to potentially expose ourselves to those black eyes and bruises from an audit perspective. And so the thing I want to call here is just to show in my store, which just essentially saying we're positioning an entitlement or a service to be triggered via self-service. This one is something that's happened behind the scenes, so you can see we don't have it selected. So this is more of a behind-the-scenes automated trigger based on some sort of attribute change. So as we start to look at attributes for this entitlement, start to think through, again, your tasks that are manual today. So as we look at attributes, this really is just the attributes that are in scope for the specific business process or an entitlement that's being set up in the Identity Director. So as we talk through what is in scope for building out an AD account, well, we need your first name, your last name. We need some sort of business process / rule for how we configure the SAM account name. Every business has a different process for that. Some folks use numbers, some folks use, your given period surname or your first out last name. There's many different ways to do this. On the right here, you're just looking at a substring that we have, but again, there's different ways to accommodate this. And you'll see things like this where we have Windows user count and this person identifier Windows user count. When you talk about automation, something as simple as Active Directory, it's pretty easy to PowerShell this process through and have a decent stance around the automation of that account. What becomes difficult with things when you start to talk about potentially writing PowerShell, something very straightforward, easy module like Active Directory, we talk about scalability, right? And we talk about what happens after the scripts run. What if something breaks? What does troubleshooting look like when things change? And so the powerful piece of this, what we'll see in the workflow, is that we can run those connectors or your existing scripts to execute set entitlements. We can get the results and use that to be passed dynamically into further runbooks for your workflow. And so you'll see placeholders like this commonly in the system. Qualification, this is really our policy engine. So we can start to see as we look at what it takes for an individual to be subscribed to this particular entitlement. Really, it's just do they have in this instance, it's did they have a location company fulfilled, and this just varies, right? We can change what criteria is necessary before we provision access, right? As we get into restrictions and dependencies, restrictions really becomes our place that we can build out segregation of duties, your checks and balances. And dependencies, we talked a little bit earlier about how we waited for that Active Directory, this specific entitlement, to be completed successfully before other services were able to kick off. And earlier we talked about kind of, as an example, the more data available to leverage, the more granular control you have available to yourself. So as we look at organization, I have different things in here, but as an example, you can start to see the different companies, the different departments that can be leveraged, department job categories. So we have different things, and really we can start to do kind of your and, nor, or types of conditions to say if you're in this cost center in this location, then go ahead and automatically provision this next workflow. And so when you meet the conditions of the workflow side of things, the qualification, then we start to look at the delivery of the workflow. When you no longer meet the qualification, that would potentially kick off the return workflow. So at a high-level view, the workflow looks pretty straightforward, but as we expand this out, this is where the workflow engine becomes a little bit more powerful. We start to check if a person exists, and then we go through some checks and balances. And finally, towards the end of the workflow, we would go ahead and send an email delivery to the respective supervisor, manager, and the individual to notify their account has been provisioned, and here's their username, here's their first-time password, here's the link they can go to reset their password, those types of things that are pretty typical in your initial onboarding email. And then on the return side, really what that is I've been terminated, I've left the company, whatever. The reason is we then look at the deprovisioning of the return side, and this then kicks off a number of services to say, let's deprovision all of his or her access, and let's finally delete the account. And the flexibility here with the workflow is we're not telling you there's a certain way to do it. Every business has a slightly different process in terms of how they manage an identity, and this is where the workflow becomes powerful because you can now leverage these various workflow actions to accommodate your respective business process. I talked about the runbook, and this is really where we start to talk to automation and where kind of the rubber meets the road. And we use the workflow engine here to talk to our Ivanti automation engine and to leverage a runbook. And this runbook gets passed into the placeholders that you saw earlier in attributes. The source of truth is just passing through this stuff and then finally being executed via the automation engine. Stop. Any questions? If not, we'll jump right into what it looks like to change roles, and you'll start to see how those transactions are. Again, we automate the deprovisioning of access and automate the provision of new access for the new role.
No questions at this time, so we'll go ahead and continue, but I just want to remind the audience, Luis is here to answer any of the questions that you have. This is a good opportunity to take advantage of the fact that we have him today. So please put your questions in the Q&A section, and he'll answer as many as he can up until the end of the presentation.
Cool. And if questions pop up later, Flycast and Ivanti available, so we can always address those outside of this webinar too. Jump back into our transaction screen. We're going to jump back and put our HR hat on. I'm going to update Andrew's account. We're going to say he's going to go become an IT analyst from an application admin role, update his particular subunit. And you know what? He's moving to Chicago too. And because he's changed roles, he now reports to a different manager. In this case, under the IT analyst role, I will have him report to myself in the system. And I'm just going to sync these now. So we'll get the transaction kicked off now and not have to wait the extra minute. And what this is just really our setup and sync tool. This isn't something you'd really be in day-to-day, but it uses our different connections into our different sources of truth to classify folks from our source of truth into the respective systems downstream. This then works very closely with that qualification criteria tab you saw within the entitlement. So now we start to see transactions kick off for Andrew. Things like updating his title, his location, his subunit. Again, as we talk about, this is a scaled down environment, so if this is production, you'd really start to see a lot more transactions kick off. We'd see a lot of group membership updates and potentially deprovisioning of systems downstream, like maybe he requires a different role now in Salesforce, a different role in your different systems of VMware or Citrix, whatever his or her role is, right? We start to talk about your different systems on-prem or in the cloud. I'll wait for these two to complete, and I just want to make sure this wasn't smoke and mirrors, so I'll jump over to kind of our Active Directory server, and you can start to see Andrew's account, one, that it's there, and two, that it's displaying the right information based on those role changes we just went through. Got Andrew. Again, you saw me move him from location to location. He's now an IT analyst from where before he was an application admin. And he's in some different groups. One notable one is the location based on the location update we just updated. And we have a IT analyst security group. and very similar as, if we were to go through kind of an offboarding, you start to see the picture that we start to provide a system that can ensure you're secure and compliant by automating your transactions based on your HR or systems of truth. So I wanted to call this out. I know that we're focusing on primarily identity, and the product's name is very straightforward, and we call it Identity Director for a reason. But what I want to also say is that the platform can absolutely be utilized to accommodate other types of things. So when we start to talk about the identity, it's not just access, it's not just their experience with an endpoint. We have folks in different roles, right? So the ability to provide a system that can automate things behind the scenes or via self-service trigger, this is where it becomes powerful, because we can start to talk about providing business processes to streamline how you potentially build VMs or do things on VMs based on a self-service trigger, how we do things in different systems, like I automate the provision account in Salesforce, and how do we then create a ticket, update the ticket, and resolve/close the ticket based on the data specific to that individual. Well, that's just steps that are added into the workflow, and that then provides kind of data alignment across different systems. So what used to be difficult tasks to take Active Directory data and do your best to align that across different systems, if they supported AD, this becomes a system now where we can use your HR, your payroll system of truth to ensure that that data is now cascaded down to your different systems. So we don't have any misspellings of names. There's no extra spaces. Again, that's that key part to standardization. And as we looked at the entitlement review, I like to think that this really is a place that you can do a couple of things. You can define a new business process and leverage that entitlement template you saw to say what attributes are in scope for this particular business process. What do we need to do with those attributes, both in the delivery and return workflow of it? And last but not least, how do we report on who has access to that entitlement and why they have access to that entitlement? And the other side of the coin is you have existing processes more than likely for some of these things. This can be a place that now you can refine your existing processes with a more robust workflow and automation engine to support it. That gives you living documentation. So as you go through, I did skip out on one thing, and I wanted to make sure we talked about it. It was versions. So as this particular one doesn't have any versions, so that's why you're seeing this message. But I'll go to the one we were working on earlier, the Windows user account, and you will see. Oh, because I don't have a version of this one. Well, I'll just change something, and you'll see it. I'll say no one qualifies. So we have a gotcha here, and this is what says, hey, you're about to make a change. 355 people were initially qualified. Now there's 0 people that would be qualified. Are you sure you want to do this? And this is that checks and balances we have in the system, kind of built-in gotchas. And this isn't something you typically would proceed with, but I'll go ahead and hit next, and we can put some comments. I'll put something like test. But obviously in your production world, you have more notes that would be expected to be put in there. You may have something. You know what? I may have something wrong with the versioning config on this, so I'll have to review that. But what I wanted to show you, which is not displaying, is that we call out the version, so that as I make that change, and that's something I did by mistake. The next day, we get calls and we say, hey, things aren't working the way they should have been working. Through that versioning tab is a very easy way just to click on a button that is just called rollback, and that rolls back to the previous working edition. And again, then we keep that audit of all these little transactions, and that would restore your transaction back to working order. So to kind of wraps up the demonstration side of things. I hope that you can see the value in taking a source of truth or sources of truth and leveraging those systems to streamline how we automate the provision or deprovisioning of access, and kind of confirming for your business, again, going back to who has access to what and who should have access to what, and how to report on that and how to act on that. Really wrapping around and rounding out your overall kind of governance over the identity within your organization.
Luis, I want to thank you for your presentation today. I definitely learned a great deal myself about this tool that I didn't even know, so I want to tell you how much it was appreciated, and I know our audience did as well. Folks, if you have any questions at all, please reach out to us at 844-FLYCAST. That's 844-359-2278. You can also email us at info@flycastpartners.com or chat with our IT specialists on our website Monday through Friday during normal business hours. We'll be happy to answer any questions we can about this tool. We'll get you the information that you need. More than happy to. And Luis, it's been a pleasure, man. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, sir. Thanks, everybody.
I very much appreciate it. All right, have a great weekend, folks.